So, I'm
Shame on you. Don't do that. Don't do that. Well, good afternoon. Here we are at Herbsaint restaurant on the corner of St. Charles and Girard, one of Donald Link, Steven Spryjewski's restaurants that has been open a while back. They're open for lunch and for dinner. So I'd like to thank Donald and Steven for allowing us to shoot this segment here. Also, for giving us the wonderful Bailey Dare, their mixologist, who's going to create a Tom Collins and a Old Fashioned for us later in the show. So without further ado, our guest today, some say he's the best food writer in the state of Louisiana. Some say the region, some say on the east of the Mississippi River.
Who are these sources? I need to find them.
Our very own Times Picayune, New Orleans advocate, Ian Mcnulty. Hello, Ian.
Hello, Fred. Great to be here.
And cheers.
Cheers. Now, to show that we're following the rules to the T, now that we have our drinks and are seated here, let's remove our masks and continue the conversation.
Thank goodness, because I am awful thirsty. So I am drinking a Plymouth Gin Tom Collins. And Ian, what's your choice?
With Buffalo Trace, first of the day.
Fantastic. And like I said, at the end of this conversation, Bailey will go ahead and break it down and show us how to make each drink individually. So, Ian, tell me first off, how'd you get into the food world? And then also what brought you to New Orleans?
Food was, well, you have to have a hobby, Fred. At first it was sustenance like anybody else, of course. Mm-hmm. I think my infatuation with food goes back to my mother, back when I was a newborn. Okay. Just kidding.
Where are you from, by the way?
I grew up in Rhode Island, which is actually a great food place, but I did not know that at the time. Growing up there, it was just sort of home cooking and the clam chowder and the crab cakes and that sort of thing. That you just grew up around it.
Right.
Really and truly, it was moving to New Orleans that ignited my curiosity and my imagination about food and launched my career as a food writer. Because when I moved here, I didn't know a soul. I moved down here from Rhode Island to New Orleans. The year was 1999. A young 25-year-old Ian Mcnulty got off his car and just thought, okay, let's see what this place is all about. And I was not covering food. I was covering banking for the local city business newspaper. But I quickly discovered what everyone in New Orleans knows, that if you want to strike up a conversation with anybody, you bring up food and drink and the culture around it and recommendations and where should I go next. And people just took me under their wing, and it really launched this exploration of food and drink in New Orleans. I got to know the city by exploring its restaurants and its bars. And as a writer, as a journalist, the topics that I started covering on the side started to revolve around those. A niche became a specialty became a career, and here we are all these years later.
Well, bravely and wisely done, I might say. So, well, congratulations on that. On NOLA.com just a little while ago, you wrote another article in regards to the new citywide ordinances that are going to take effect this coming Saturday.
That's right.
Can you tell us about what the restaurateur is saying in that regard?
Well, restaurateurs have been through a lot, that's needless to say. Everyone in our community has been through a lot in these past few months. But in the restaurant realm, it's hitting on every front. It's hitting financially, personally, emotionally, spiritually, and the great unknowns for the future are way heavy. My heart goes out to everybody who's in the business who's being affected by this, because I know how deeply they care about this line of work as a calling, as a profession. They're proprietors. They're lifelong hospitality professionals. They've built their careers and expertise around this. And the real heart of it is not knowing what's going to come next. So, they have to respond to these rules that come down from the city and often the state. And what I hear from a lot of people is they're just looking for clarity. They just want to know what to plan for and what to expect next. And we're dealing with a situation where nobody really knows that week to week. So,
right.
You hear a lot of frustration, you hear a lot of fatigue, but this is also New Orleans. This is also the industry we know and love. You also hear some laughter in between it sometimes,
Right.
sometimes dour laughter, but also hope, and we can get into that too.
Well, I think we had mentioned earlier that at least in the restaurant world that is open, and I know in the retail trade, the consumption of spirits, wine has not slipped much. So I know that there's hope there for New Orleanians.
The interest is not abated, that's for sure. So means of
That's right.
distribution may have been adjusted.
And look, also earlier this week, federal money came down to people that applied for the loans. Long-term status. How is this going to help the restaurateur, you feel?
Well, Fred, it really depends restaurant to restaurant. One of the things that we love about New Orleans restaurants is how different they are, how idiosyncratic, how characteristic they are. Right? These are not cookie cutter type of operations.
Right.
This is why we love them. But it also makes forecasting the future and just dealing with these changes a lot harder. You're not talking about a regimented industry where shop XYZ will do A, B, C, and everyone will be in lockstep. Vastly different clienteles for some of these restaurants, different situations of whether they own their property, rent their property, how much staff they need for their business model, what their partners and investors are feeling. So all of these factors play into it. But what I've been hearing is that with an extension of this money, it does give them more options. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. No one's doing high fives and running around in circles gleefully about this. But it does give more options on the table, and you're going to see different restaurants respond to that in different ways. For some restaurants, this is a time where they're looking ahead to maybe we should temporarily close down and put our chips on the fall. Let's take July and maybe some of August off and be in a better position to come back stronger, not so exhausted in the fall when things hopefully are looking a little better. For others, saying, nope, we got open. We did the hard work once. We're going to do everything we can to stay open. I've got my people back on staff. We're trying to find a way to proceed safely and to be in a good spot when things do pick up. So, different strategies for different places. And I'll say, don't count anybody out. Restaurants that have remained closed throughout some of this, including some very big names in New Orleans, fully intend to come back. They're just biding their time, waiting for the right circumstances to line up with their own situation. And others that are closing down, it's easy to say, oh my gosh, my favorite place closed, I'm so distraught. Very few places have said, we're closing down forever, so long. Most of them are saying, so long for now, folks, we'll be back in a better position. So
Right. So with this downtime that some of the chefs and restaurateurs have, is it a time for them to be more creative with their menus, or as such?
In a word, yes. It is, but being creative can take a lot of different forms, right, Fred?
Right.
Especially with the base material that we have to work with in New Orleans. This is not a time for business as usual because that just won't fly. I mean, everyone knows that. Number of customers that you can serve, if they're there, the absence of the customers you usually do serve, if a lot of travelers are part of your clientele, all of this is out the window. But to your point, chefs and restaurateurs are being creative. They're being creative with how they present their menus. They're being creative with how they respond to the needs that they're hearing from the community. They're being creative with the ways that they structure their businesses. Some of this is temporary. Some of this may well be permanent. And you're seeing restaurants be more flexible, saying, okay, we want to serve you, our customer, the way you want to be served. And right now, that might mean a full service meal. That might mean takeout. That might mean a family style feast. That might mean some staples from our kitchen for your kitchen. And it might mean all of those things at once. Now, I think it will reveal new opportunities for people. I think that there are a lot of times those restaurateurs are following what their customers are responding to. What they're willing to show up for and pay money for. So it's a lot of trial and a lot of by necessity getting creative.
Gotcha. Well, I certainly know that you've been a busy man, and I'm sure it's been somewhat tough on you. Going around the city and seeing what's going on, but how many articles a week do you write?
It really depends what's happening, right? Okay, so we have our print product, the Times Picayune New Orleans Advocate, and there's a certain number of stories that I need to file for that to take up the sections, to occupy those sections that people have. But news is different these days. Things happen quick.
Right.
You hear things, you think, gosh, people need to know about this right now, whether it's some big change that's happened or just some perspective that's out there. I think one of the things that I can do right now, what I've been trying to devote some effort to, is to serve our New Orleans community, our restaurant operators, our restaurant staff, and our restaurant lovers especially, with a dose of perspective on this. Because anybody can see the headline news and understand that it's a very dire situation. It would take an army of pastry chefs to try to sugarcoat that, right? It's bad out there. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
But there are some things that we have here in New Orleans that I am very, very fortunate to count among our blessings. First of all, we have New Orleans culture. That's not going anywhere.
Right.
It's the devices that we use to express it and share it are limited right now because of the contours of this horrible pandemic we're going through. But the culture is there, and that culture is going to be back in fine form, and probably, I think, in better form when things improve, because we'll all have gone through this together. It's hard times, no doubt about it. But what do hard times do? They season the skillet, right? They test people's mettle. It's going to be the thing that builds the stories, that creates the culture, that gives new energy to those celebrations to come.
Well,
a lot of us saw that after Katrina.
Right,
Yes.
right. So I think you just answered my next question in regards to, do you think the consumer that goes out to the restaurants because of this pandemic will change their normal operandi?
There are going to be some changes to habits. People are getting used to certain things during this time that they may not want to shake off, right? If everything was to go back to normal tomorrow, or let's be more realistic, in a few months, there are people who enjoyed spending a little more of this time at home, who enjoy getting back into the kitchen. I think some of those things may be there to stay. But if we're talking about the restaurant industry, the bar industry, I've long maintained the single most important ingredient to making those things stick, the single most important ingredient that really gives it their character, is the New Orleans people. We have our history, we have our traditional dishes, we have our classic cocktails, we have the great settings in which we enjoy them in, right? These historic buildings, we have the neighborhoods we travel to. What gives it its life? It's the people who work in these restaurants, but it's also the people who come into the restaurants, the regulars, your clientele, the people who light up that room, the people who bring their celebrations, their parties, their gatherings, their moments of their life into these places. That's what really animates New Orleans restaurants. And I think that's true from the high-end fine dining places right down to the po' boy shops. Right. So that at the end of the day, what I'm always writing about, I think, is the relationship that New Orleans people have with their restaurants, their bars, their hospitality culture. There's a lot of different ways to express that. Right now, we're living through a time where people are expressing it in a very different way because they have to, because of the circumstances. Right. You lift those restrictions, you lift those circumstances, people are going to pour back into that. It's that valuable to their lifestyle and their identity as New Orleans people.
Very good, very good. Well, that is certainly uplifting for sure. A great perspective, and I'm sure in 2021, our culinary industry will be back stronger than ever. So, let me thank you.
How about a drink?
How about a little sip of this? Ian, thank you very much for joining us. And now we're going to have Bailey Dare show us how to do these two cocktails. Thank you very much.
Cheers, everybody.
The first one that we're going to make is I'm using this Plymouth gin. It's super simple. It's just 2 ounces of gin, 1 ounce of lemon juice, and half an ounce of simple syrup. Just gonna lid, fill it with ice. Top it with soda water. And give it a little stir. You can garnish it with a lemon wedge with a Luxardo cherry in it. And you're ready for a refreshing cocktail.
For the next drink, you're making another one, right?
Yes, sir.
I want you to start. Did you just serve me?
Sorry.
She served me. Alright. You know you're getting old when you're a sir. Go ahead and say your name. Hey, I'm
Okay.
you know, with Herbsaint.
Okay.
Okay, good.
You ready?
Mhm.
Hi, I'm with Herbsaint Bar and Restaurant, and today we're gonna make really simple, classic old using Buffalo Trace bourbon. 2 ounces of bourbon. We're just going to use about a bar spoon full of Demerara simple syrup. Um, 3 to 4 dashes. Need an orange. Just express it over the drink. Sardo cherry.